I would start by defining Druidry as a nature-reverent spiritual tradition that's unified by shared practices and intentions rather than by shared theology or ritual forms. Druids will also try to develop those kinds of relationships with flora and fauna in their local landscapes, really deeply getting to know who the plants and the animals and the trees are. They'll connect with spirits of nature and spirits of place and nature divinities, and also just the physiological things, the soils, the mountains, the streams, like anything that is born, grows, transforms, right, changes, declines, dies, is reborn, like anything that's sort of involved in cycles of that kind have a living essence to them. And Druids work to cultivate those kinds of relationships and answer those kinds of questions for all of those types of beings.
Hello, and welcome to episode 124 of Toward a Better Life. That was Alex Roberts with Yggdrasil from his newest album, Trespass. You might remember Alex from just a couple of weeks ago, and he's back with this music, and I hope you enjoyed it. And, there's a link in the show notes for more music from Alex Roberts, a modern-day troubadour. Interestingly, Yggdrasil is a huge tree in Norse mythology that overspreads the world and binds the earth. In fact, it's the Norse tree of life, encompassing all 9 worlds that are part of the ancient Norse view of the cosmos. And interesting as well, it's an ash tree in which all the worlds, including the world of humans and the world of gods, nestle among the branches and roots. It's a lovely picture depicting how we are linked together spiritually, physically, emotionally, and mentally. It's sort of the way that I like to think about the mission of Toward a Better Life, a podcast featuring like-minded people sharing your stories, ideas, and activities on what we can all do to, link us together in a better life, individually and collectively. In today's world, there is truly a need for seeking balance, harmony, compassion, kindness on so many levels, personally, culturally, spiritually, to name a few. But it all begins with each one of us as an individual. And that's what I like to share in this podcast from around the world, seeking others of the same spirit, heart, and mind. It's a platform, a school, a venue to begin and continue that journey to wholeness and harmony. I also offer the opportunity for you to share your prose, music, poetry, or storytelling on the show. Please subscribe to the show if you haven't done so already. This is your first time. Welcome to the crew. And already you can maybe check it out as your favorite podcast on your podcast platform, and keep following for weekly magical insights into earth-based spirituality, self-development, and self-care. Also, remember to support the show by leaving a review on Apple and Spotify podcast. It only takes a minute to leave a review, and please visit my website too, towardabetterlife.com. You can contact me there to learn more about a free discovery call to help you on your journey. Send all the inquiries to kevin@towardabetterlife.com. As most of you already know, I do have a special love for and reverence toward the natural world. It's a Druid thing, I guess. That's where we're headed on today's chat with Dr. Larisa A. White. Larisa writes to celebrate nature, advocate ecological stewardship, and to explore the ways in which people relate or fail to relate across nations and cultures, landscapes, and species. She's won international awards for her poetry and screenwriting and enjoys writing rich stories with compelling characters grounded in the living world. Larisa's past projects have ranged from award-winning screenplays for animated films like Be Mine to acclaimed academic studies, World Druidry. That's what we're going to be talking with her about today, that book. It explores how modern Druids relate to their local landscapes. At present, she's developing the modern eco-myth trilogy, Tales of the Primordial Mountain. I do hope you enjoyed today's chat, and that's about What is a Druid? With Larisa White on Toward a Better Life. On today's episode of Toward a Better Life, I want to welcome Larisa White to our program. And Larisa, so glad to see you. And I see you have a beautiful little background there. It's amazing what we can do with Zoom these days.
That's actually outside my window right there. I'm in the Coast Range Mountains of California, and that's a reservoir that's right between my hill and the ocean.
Oh, beautiful. That's beautiful. So today we're going to be looking into Druidry, a little bit different, everyone, than we've looked before, because Larisa has listened to the program a few times, and I'll thank her again for this bit of information that we really maybe have not really gotten into that much about what is a Druid anyway, and some information that's saying that how familiar everyone might be with Druidry in general. So it might be a good idea for us to begin and think about that. So let's start a little bit, Larisa, in a short version about what began your journey on Druidry, and let's kind of move into the other aspects. And don't forget, we need to talk about your book that you've got out there, and it's quite good, everyone. I've already started it, so the stage is yours.
So I've been practicing Druid since 2016, and I stumbled upon it accidentally. So I
Okay,
had been,
we'll go with stumbled. Okay.
right. I just stumbled upon it. I'd been reading world religions for years and years, and I stumbled upon the word and, read a book and said, that sounds a little bit like my autobiography. When I read it was a Greer's book. And there was so much about it that the care of the ecology and the reverence of the natural world. And there were aspects of the Druid philosophy that appealed to me. And so I was intrigued enough and I joined all the major orders, right? I joined AODA, I joined the OBOD, the Druid Network, the British Druid Order, Andrach Fane, and I studied the first year curriculums for all of them, digging and digging. And I was in it for several years. And then I started becoming concerned because there was so much diversity in the curriculum materials, how the different groups applied it, in the ritual forms I was seeing, and even in theology that people were talking about on the boards. And I started wondering, is there really such a thing as Druidry? Honestly, I mean, this was my question because there's so many different people who approach things apparently in so many different ways, all using the title Druid. And it concerned me because if you have a label and anybody can use it to mean anything, then does it really mean anything at all? Right? Is the only thing we share in common that we like to use that word as a title? Right? I wasn't sure. Yeah. And also, so many of the groups emphasized these big fancy rituals and fancy dress and magical props and tools and polytheism. Yep. And that's fine, but it didn't speak to who I was or how I perceived the divine. So I wasn't sure that I belonged in Druidry. And at this point, I was, in AODA, I was a companion. I had gone almost to the top level, and I'm beginning to wonder if I belonged. And so I had this background in sociological research and decided that, well, the surest way to find out is to go out and do the research and get the answer. So sort of apply my scientific tools to that project. And so I proposed the World Druidry Survey as a project to both be the 23rd Mount Haemus Scholarship Project and to be my Druid Adept project for the AODA. And I expected to do a survey, maybe get 50 or 60 people with maybe a handful in each of a few countries so I could do some international comparison to see about the differences and similarities between groups. And I'd write a paper and then I'd go home. And so I did the work and it got complicated because I realized I only have one narrow perspective on Druidry, right? I'm one person. Yeah. And I didn't want to exclude people by picking questions that omitted people or disrespected something I didn't know was there or neglected something that should have been there. So I went out and I interviewed leaders from a dozen or so different Druid orders to get their feedback on my initial survey instrument. And they made recommendations and comments and concerns, and the survey instrument evolved trying to make sure that it was really open to all people, welcoming to all people to tell their stories. And the survey instrument ended up having 189 questions. And 18 of them were open-ended essay questions, right? So no one in their right mind should do this thing. So now I'm thinking, oh, maybe I'll get 30 people. I don't know what I'll get, but whatever, I'll send it out into the world. But people are going to be asked about very personal, private things. And people are often scared about revealing themselves when they're pagans and feeling some of the oppression coming down from the outside. And how are you going to get people to feel comfortable opening up? Oh, it's got to be in 6 different languages. So no matter where in the world the Druids are. So I got translators. We translated the thing, sent it out into the world. Over 1,000 people began it. And 725 Druids completed the entire thing. They wrote They wrote 1,500 single-spaced pages of narratives about their religious beliefs, their spiritual practices, all their holidays, all this stuff. So there was more than a paper in that.
Just a little more.
And it took me 3 years to sort through all that data. And in fact, my husband is a software guy, and he had to write new software for me because all the standard software used to analyze that kind of, it was quantitative and qualitative data together in mixed methods. And all the standard software packages that do that kind of analysis, they could take like 60 people, these tiny data sets. So I had to have new software written that could analyze it for me. It was a blast. Anyway, so 3 years later, there's this book out, which based on not my personal ideas or opinions, but just based on descriptions of what the Druids across the world say about what they actually do and what they actually believe and how they actually practice on the ground. And that ended up being the World Druidry book.
And I would say that like I said, I just started this, everyone. And if you want to know, may I use the term, Larisa, contemporary Druidry?
Absolutely.
Yeah, so I'm going to say contemporary Druidry, if you're looking at what is it today, because, I read in my journeys, I've read a lot of different books and a lot of different things and a lot of different religions and theologies and all this stuff. And I think, part of my journey, I can even go pre-Christian and go back to the point where I was always attracted to I Ching, for an example. I was always attracted to a lot of the Eastern stuff, and I was attracted to the Celtic stuff. And I could never quite hang my hat on anyone in particular because they were all so, and here's the word, diverse. And I couldn't quite find a home, and my home was found in Druidry. But if you want to know, everyone, what Druidry is today, and unequivocally, I would say you really need to get a copy of this book because I've started it. And Larisa, I'm going to say it here on the program. I think you've done a wonderful job in putting this information together in a very practical sense. It's not just a bunch of data that's there because the data is there, but as you've already said, it really shows the hub, if you will, of what Druidry is in the 21st century.
Thank you. Thank you. Actually, It's true. I was astonished to find there was a common core when I did that analysis because of all the diversity. And I think part of the reason why I am so astonished by it is that if you think about how modern Druidry evolved, let me step back for a minute. Most modern world religions began with, a single teacher or a single prophet or a single guru or a single sacred text and a centralized vision of what that religious tradition would be like. And that information was disseminated through teaching and preaching in a very controlled top-down manner, right? And sometimes there were schisms, but it started from the top and worked its way down. In contrast, modern Druidry sprang up in multiple locations across Europe and the United States, roughly about the same time in sort of the 60s and 70s. And it sprang up with different groups inspired by different things. So, for example, for some like the Ancient Order of Druids America and the Order of Bards, Soviets, and Druids, the OBOD, it was the legends and lore of the Druid revival movement that inspired those traditions. For some, like Androchfain, it was an attempt to recreate an earlier form or multiple earlier forms of polytheistic worship, and they actually build themselves as a modern Druidic polytheistic church. For some, like the British Druid Order, it was a search for an authentic British shamanistic tradition that inspired it. And for some in America, like the Reformed Druids of North America, it was an excuse to get out of church services on a college campus. They needed to have some kind of service. So inspired by Druid, they made And so you've got all these different groups with all these different reasons for being and huge variations in the curriculum materials that they provide.
Mm-hmm.
And despite that, the actual day to day spiritual practices of modern Druids across the globe somehow converged on this spiritual common core that, a small set of shared practices that like 90 to 96% of all Druids do these same things. And I don't, I'm still have no idea how that happened. Like I could document through the data that it happened, but how is a really interesting question. And I have some theories on what might be, but I don't have any set answer.
Well, you could almost go along with a guest I recently spoke with, who was Michael Wilson, and it's a magical little word. And I think Philip Cargam has used it a few times. Matter of fact, his podcast is very similar to that. He calls his podcast "This Magical Life," and then Michael Wilson talks about the mysticism of it all, and the mysticism of just walking out in the woods and how can you ignore certain things. And I would say that the commonality of what you're sharing is, to me, it's the way the universe directed it and says, okay, we have a group of people on this planet, not in this country, but on this planet, that really do have a sense of awareness toward the natural world and a sense of respect and honor and awe toward the natural world. And it's not just the touchy-feely stuff. It goes deeper than that into, I'm going to say, even the mycelium itself between trees and how we become unified with it. And so our common entity is nature, is the natural world, and the respect and honor to it, wouldn't you say?
I would agree. I would start by defining Druidry as a nature reverent spiritual tradition that's
Yes.
unified by shared practices and intentions rather than by shared theology or ritual forms.
Yeah, I
That's
mean that's the ongoing joke, isn't it? You have 12 druids and you bring them in a room and you'll have 15 different opinions.
Yes. And actually, that what you just said, I was conversing with my husband earlier about this very thing when it came to theology and the cultural norms of conversation among Druids. If you see on the forums, um, it's the only place on the internet these days where I actually see civilized discourse about things as
Yeah.
opposed to flame wars. Um, and it comes down to, I think, a sense of humility at heart, in that Druids will regularly put forth their thoughts, but they put forth their thoughts as their take on it. And your mileage may vary, or
Hmm.
they'll take on it, but I'm open to hearing your perspective because I know that I'm still growing and learning.
Yeah.
I know that I am nowhere near equal to the divine, whatever that may be, in my understanding of things, and that anyone, any being might have some wisdom to share with me that can help me understand more, right, and become better connected. And that extends even to theology, which we'll get to discuss. I get a little bit more in depth later on, but even the perspective on what what is the nature of divinity.
Hmm.
Um, that question is answered in very interesting ways by Druids that I've never seen anywhere else before. They talk about having their beliefs evolve. They talk about having multiple, sometimes seemingly conflicting, simultaneous beliefs. And it's not because they're misguided or confused, it's because they understand that they're still trying to cobble together their understanding of the divine and how they can connect with it. And that it's, of course, that's going to change as I learn and grow, right?
Hmm. Hmm.
And I just find that humility is fundamental to how Druids relate to all living beings.
When I was writing Two Feather Spiritual Seed Planter some years ago, one of the things that I found was it doesn't really matter what I'm going to use the term religion you pick, there's going to be what I like to consider a central truth. And it's not just a single central truth. There are central truths that seem to permeate every form. And I'm now moved toward spirituality. And I remember in the past, and I've mentioned this before, I'll keep it short, that I was asked, a couple of times about, well, what do you believe as far as religion is concerned with your background? And I said, well, right now, I would just look at myself as an eclectic. And, and they said, well, an eclectic, they believe in everything. And I said, no, not necessarily, because an eclectic picks and chooses what they wish to believe. And interestingly enough, Larissa, there was a term that I saw that came up before me, and you probably are already familiar with it, but there's a word out there, it's called I believe it's omniist. Does that make sense?
Yes. Yes,
And
it was one of them.
I said, wow, there's the word. A person who does not claim any one religion, practice, or belief, but finds truth in them all. And I said, man, that's me. But
There's an
so I can be an animist, boy, there's a mouthful, an animist and an omniist at the same time.
Yeah, say that 10 times fast.
Yeah. I'd
There's
rather just say 10 times fast. Go ahead.
there was another really good one that tickled me when I was going to the analysis of all the various theological perspectives. There were so many isms I'd never heard of in my life. It was just, I was looking stuff up all the time. That's why there's a big glossary in the back. Because, but this one came from the Netherlands, and and I'm not sure if I pronounce it correctly, but it's Yetzism. And what it translates to is roughly somethingism, as in, yeah, I believe there's something more than us out there, but I'm not sure what it is, but I believe in it.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's like, what a great concept.
Well, there's even when I look into, I'm going to say biblical truth or biblical legend, or words or whatever, but it's hard to ignore that there is something that began and continues to sustain what we know as living organisms and living truth. We can go into the biological aspects, we can go in the chemistry of it all, and yet something maintains it, something began it. And we know, and I certainly believe it, that as besides it being a really good program at the time with the Big Bang Theory, you know, that it all started somehow. And I when I was in college, one of the things that really kind of tweaked me a little bit, and I said, it's interesting, was deism. There's a good ism for you. And basically, it's that there's the belief that that a God or supreme being came in and poof, brought the world into existence and then went on a vacation. Well, okay. So there we go from there. But this is Druidry.
Well, I mean, the thing about Druidry is the beliefs about the nature of the divine are very diverse, but that's not really what Druidry is about, right? Druidry is really about the intention of cultivating honorable relationships with the world.
Yes.
And cultivating honorable relationships with the divine, however you conceive that divine to be at this time, is merely one piece of that puzzle. And I think it's the fact that the relationships are spread across so many types of beings that makes Druidry different from so many other religious traditions. So, if we want to get to know another person, say we don't believe in anything religious or spiritual. I mean, there are people who believe in none of that. But if they want to build an honorable relationship with another person, attracted, hey, let me make this relationship, they're going to start by asking of themselves and that person some basic, respectful questions designed to build a genuine connection. They're going to ask, who are you really? And they're going to sit tight and listen for what that answer is, right? How do you perceive the world? Right? it's going to be different from how I perceive the world. So let me ask and be quiet and pay attention and try to understand your perspective. What are your unique gifts to the world, right? Everyone brings something. What is it that I can most delight in about your way of being and doing and seeing? What wisdom might you have to share with me, right? We have different takes on the world because we have different experiences and different lives. So clearly you have stuff to teach me. I don't know what that is. I don't know if it will be useful for me, but if I respect you, I want to know really what wisdom you've found in your life. And then obviously I'm going to want to reciprocate, because otherwise I'm taking everything from you. I want to be able to know what I can do in return for all of that wonderful life experience that you bring to the table. And all compassionate people of all religions do that, right? But most of them do it for other humans. Druids will also do that for ourselves. We'll do it for our ancestors of blood, spirit, and place, right? So for the people who pass down the DNA and our family traditions and all that stuff. Also, the great teachers that we've learned from, we'll want to build connections with. And many Druids also work to develop connections with spirits of place, which are usually the indigenous peoples that had originally stewarded the land we're sitting on, because most of us are living on lands that were not originally ours, right? So Druids will also try to develop those kinds of relationships with flora and fauna in their local landscapes, really deeply getting to know who the plants and the animals and the trees are. They'll connect with spirits of nature and spirits of place and nature divinities, and also just the physiological things, the soils, the mountains, the streams, like anything that is born, grows, transforms, right, changes, declines, dies, is reborn, like anything that's sort of involved in cycles of that kind have a living essence to them. And Druids work to cultivate those kinds of relationships and answer those kinds of questions for all of those types of beings. And I find that to be a very interesting thing. And that's really across the board.
Yeah. Yeah. And you said a couple of things that you said more than a couple of things that all of them is no, don't be sorry. This is great. I love it. But something that really struck out to me, and that is ask and be quiet. And how often we find that, how do I get out into nature, and how do I really connect with nature? And it's always a tongue-in-cheek thing when you're out and about and really maybe in a public location like an arboretum or a state park, a national park, or on a trail or whatever, and you're just really soaking in all the beauty around you. And then all of a sudden you hear thump, 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 rattle, 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 crack, 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 ha, ha, ha. And you got all these people that are just really, and they're not quiet.
No, they're not quiet.
They're appreciating it at their own level, and that's okay. That really is. Let them go by. You don't have to chastise them because they're enjoying themselves, which is really what nature can do. It makes you happy, you know? But I think I've heard some stuff recently when they start talking about myths and legends and things like that, is you ask and be quiet. That's so difficult sometimes. You ask the question and then be quiet and listen. And it's almost like a reverie for me. Is the gods gave me two ears and one mouth. There's got to be a reason for that. And and we want to know the answers to Druidry, and we want to know the answers to nature. Go out in nature, ask the question, why am I here, and why do I love you in the natural world? And then be quiet. If you wait about 5 to 7 minutes, and I've timed it like this, if you wait less than 5 to 7 minutes and just sit there and not fidget, not do anything, and just close your eyes and listen, and all of a sudden things will start happening. It's just, to me, that's Druidry.
It is indeed. And I think It's not just quiet with your mouth.
Yes.
It's also quiet with your mind.
Yes.
And when we talk about that common core that I mentioned that came out of the data, there's like 7 pieces that are nearly universal across the world.
I was hoping you'd get to those.
Yeah, well, the top one, the most prevalent one, which is like, I think it's like 97% of world Druids, they maintain a regular practice of either doing visualizations or meditations.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not to become a meditation expert. It's about cultivating the calm, quiet, focused mind that allows you to be able to perceive and recognize when wisdom is coming to you from outside, right? When I was struggling with my young son being a crazy person, and I'm stomping through the redwoods, and the kid's like a wildfire. He just spots and burns up everything in sight. What do? How do you deal with this? And I sat and I just was quiet, wondering what you do. And the redwood tree said, you grow a foot thick, spongy bark that protects you from the fire, but is still huggable.
Oh.
And I thought, wow, that's a good answer. But it's by being quiet and looking at who's next to you and what is their experience and how do they respond to a similar situation, and waiting and not speaking in your head or with your mouth, but just kind of waiting to see what comes. And so I think that that meditation and visualization practice is key, because it helps Druids practice being receptive and quiet to those answers.
What's number 2?
Oh, number two is actually having a regular practice of prayer, conversation, or other relationship building activities with deities and spirits of place, depending on the theology, right? So Druids have all their different variations, various takes on what the divine is, but whatever they perceive it to be, they spend time talking with those beings, trying to figure out how to work with them. And again, that meditation practice allows the quiet to try to hear what might be coming in.
And that could even be perceived in some responses as prayer.
Yeah, and it's prayer. Although some people don't like the idea of prayer because it's,
I don't.
Because it's, but it's, prayer is a communication, a heartfelt communication, right? But it's usually seen as sort of supplication for gifts, right? And it's, if you have a Santa Claus model of the divine, that's what you've got, right? That's what your relationship is.
Yeah,
and that's okay. But for many Druids, they talk about their god or gods, or their conception of the divine as being a being that they work with in a kind of a partnership, right? It's a collaboration. Sometimes they discuss a sort of a mentor mentee relationship. Sometimes they talk about their relationship with the divine, like a good neighbor that you say hello to as you pass by, or some of them talked about it like family members, right? So you have this sense of loyalty and irritation, right, side by side. So however you decide you're communicating, for some they just kind of talk to the air, and some it's more formal, sitting at your altar and all that.
And that's okay. They're all there, and that's the point. They're all acceptable. What is acceptable to you? What works for you? There's no dogma on you have to do it this way. No, you do it the way that you feel comfortable with, and yet at the same token you're honoring whatever space that might be. So what's number 3?
But before we get to number 3, I want to go back to number 2. Before we go to number 3. Oh, and I just lost it. Poof. There it went. Sorry, there was a fleeting thought. I guess I'll go leave it in the past. Okay, number 3 is a regular practice of one or more extrasensory methods of seeking wisdom and guidance. And I'll elaborate on that. So there's a large variety of things people try. But again, any one of these choices is a practice that helps a Druid see their own situation and choices from different perspectives than their normal ego-based personal perspective, right? And the idea is so how do you gain clarity and make better decisions? So many Druids use spiritual journeying as a technique where they're sort of close your eyes and you're going on a journey through an inner imagined landscape. Some use divination, using runes or tarot cards or such tools to try to get images and symbols that trigger your brain to turn the perspective, right? You're turning the perspective. Seership is another one. And that's more you're cultivating that stillness and just allowing things to come. And shape-shifting is another one, less common, and shape-shifting, to be clear, you're not actually turning into a bird. I think of it as firing the mirror neurons that would enable you to imagine yourself into the perspective of another creature or being, right? Like I find great stashes of blueberries by imagining the perspective of a wren. You can find the underneath bit of where the leaf would be that is likely to hide that if you think of yourself into the mind of a wren. But so some examples of that.
Yeah. 4?
Number 4 is using a nature-based spiritual and energetic framework for rituals, both formal and informal. And so the most common of this is the 4 elements: air, fire, water, and earth, right? You see this, the Obad uses this, and they assign each of the cardinal directions to one of these elements, which are not elements in the chemistry sense, but they're elements that within Druid philosophy symbolize certain characteristics, certain personality traits, certain powers, tendencies. For example, air is often associated with intellect, right? And speech. Fire is associated with passion and endurance and courage. Water with emotions and sort of flexibility. Earth with a groundedness, right? And so there's sort of attributes that come with each of those elements. And by meditating on the 4 elements and calling them together, you're sort of trying to bring those qualities of person into yourself, right? That's an energy that you're using. Another one that's popular is the trio of land, sea, and sky, which that's the one that I tend to use because where I live, it's all these mountains and you can't see the horizon anywhere. And your proximity to a waterway is more meaningful than where's that north, where's the north arrow? I can't tell. And then there's combinations, like there's some that use the above and below duality, this the heaven and earth, or a combination of those. Again, diverse combinations, make your own. But usually there's some kind of framework that's used in that way.
Okay. 5. We're doing right. We're doing well.
We're doing well. Okay, 5. This is a big one. This is part of what actually drew me to Druidry, which is regular practice of nature connection plus environmental stewardship work of some kind.
Right.
So by nature connection, we've talked about spending time alone in nature, maintaining that full sensory, extrasensory awareness of every being nearby, right? And trying to be aware of and connected to them and respectful of them. But then Druids will take this a step further. Most Druids also do some concrete stewardship work. Some do this in the form of activism to protect. There are people who file lawsuits to protect public lands and so forth. But a lot of people get their hands in the dirt. So a lot of people do sort of ecosystem restoration work. They create wildlife habitats. They grow organic food and they compost their wastes. Some engage in installing solar and wind power systems to try to lower carbon footprint. Most of them work to change their personal consumption habits, to protect the natural environment. So like reducing plastic, or right, there's all the different ways you can do that. And I even saw there's one fascinating story that came from a Druid in Canada whose work involved deciding the policy and issuing hunting permits for deer. And he was a hunter. And he saw that as a sacred act because he was working to consciously help maintain the appropriate balance of deer population in a region where the natural predators had been extirpated, right? And so he's seeing that as a way of helping the ecological system to remain robust. It's like, so it's all that. So, and the list goes on. There's many, many different ways that they do it, but it's real practical hands in the dirt stewardship.
Okay.
In addition to, so it's not all woo-woo. There is the woo-woo, right? But it's very practical as well.
Yeah. Okay. 6.
6 is celebrating a cycle of seasonal festivals based on what's actually happening in the local environment.
Good.
And this is a little bit new to me. I'm used to knowing the wheel, the eightfold wheel of the year, right? Most pagan traditions use that, and it uses the solstices and equinoxes, and then a set of cross-quarter days, sort of halfway between those, which are based on an old agricultural cycle of Britain.
Right.
And that was kind of created in southwestern Britain, and it's sort of used ubiquitously in many pagan traditions. However, it doesn't necessarily make sense in places where the natural climate and ecology don't mirror that same 4 seasons cycle, right? So that cycle presumes that you start your year after the first hard frost kills all the life, and the leaves drop and things go dormant and get icy, and then you've got the cold and the dark period that's dormant, and then you have the beginnings of things pushing up through the newly thawed earth, and then the flowering, and then the planting, and then the harvest seasons, and then you go back around. And those cycles are dependent on cycles of light and dark and cold and warm being the primarily drivers. There are many environments on the planet where those things don't come into play. So Druids living in and around that band around the equator, they're got 12 hours of light and day almost all year round, right? So the big solstice equinox thing may not be a big deal. There's a lot of places where there's never a hard frost. There is no winter dormant season, but there are cycles of moisture and dryness that drive the thing. And so it's, when does the rain come and when is the 7-month annual drought, where, like in California, we have this, we have this rainy season where it's chilly, sort of maybe like a spring might be in that 4-season cycle. And then there's, 6 or 7 months where you don't get a drop of rain. And that's not a drought. That's just the normal cycle. So our seasons depend on that cycling. And that's true in parts of Africa and Australia. And then there's rainforests, which have a whole different thing. And so you basically, if you're a Druid, you have 2 choices. You either use the traditional eightfold year of the wheel and hide inside your house and use picture postcards of what the seasons are supposed to be. But then you're breaking that connection, right? We're about forming an honorable relationship with the natural world, right? And you're not really honoring the natural world if you're denying its existence to celebrate something that's not there. So what surprised me is that like 53% of Druids across the world wildcraft their seasonal celebrations by looking at what's happening in the local landscape. And they create their own ogam with the local trees and plants. They celebrate different kinds of holidays, like some celebrate the return of the monsoon, some like the different kinds of things. And even in some of the 4-season things, they shift dates forward or backward, or right, to accommodate what's actually going on. And so I found that to be one of the more beautiful things. I talk about that a lot because I think that's really fascinating.
Well, it's working within your own environment, working within where you live. And I heard that from somebody in a recent comment about he was he was from Ireland, and he was talking about how the Druids of Ireland were, and he talked about, one of the things you need to do you should do, or look into, is honor the gods and the lands where you are.
Yeah.
Because, it's just it. Number 7, we might make it. No one knows what we're talking about, but that's okay.
That's okay.
We're on a time break, everyone.
I'll say number 7. Number 7, the last one, is engaging in an ongoing process of seeking wisdom wherever it may be found. And we talked a little bit about this earlier, but Druids read voraciously, seeking wisdom, and not just books on Druidry. They read all world religions, history, science, nature writing, psychology. They learn from nature. And they also learn through those respectful two-way conversations we had mentioned earlier, of trying to remain open to the perspectives that you can gain from others. And those are the main. Those
are 7, what we call the 7 common core spiritual practices of Druidry, and it kind of makes us Druids. And there's so much more that I would love to talk with you about, Larisa, but we're on a time constraint, and I get it. She's about to I'm going to say it. She's about to have some work done out there in California, and she's going to lose her power literally any moment. So,
yeah, wildfire safety. They're making poles that won't fall down in the winds.
This is
cause
good.
Wildfires.
So real quick, and I suspect we're going to do this again sometime. I hope we are, Larisa. But what does Larisa do to create a better life for herself?
Wow, I spend time planting native plants and creating habitat and restoring a little 1/3 acre patch of the California Coast Range Mountains. And that really feeds me. That's
beautiful.
Yeah.
That's great. So any last things that you want to share on this episode?
Oh, no, I'm sure I could go on and on forever, but it's been delightful.
Yeah, likewise. And I really appreciate it. Go out and plant some beautiful plants today while you can.
Thank you. I will.
All right.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been really a pleasure.
The pleasure is mutual, and be well, Larisa, and blessed be. Thank you, Larisa, for sharing information about your book, World Druidry, and sharing insightful thoughts that depicts today's Druids. Check out the show notes for more information about Dr. Larisa White, her books, and her work. Fascinating. And if you get a chance to get the book, do so. It is compelling, it's rich, and it's so, so good to read. I loved it. If you're seeking insights and advice on how to create a better life for yourself, and if you'd like to dive into some self-care, self-development, or distant shamanic work, Reiki, drop me a line, kevin@towardaBetterLife.com, for your free discovery call. You can also visit my website, towardaBetterLife.com, for past episodes of the program, blog entries, ways to enhance your spiritual journey, and a few products along the way. Again, send all your inquiries to me, kevin@towardaBetterLife.com. And please subscribe and follow the show on your favorite podcast platform, and leave a review, please, on Apple or Spotify podcasts, and it just helps to spread the word about the podcast and helps to create a better life for each and every one of us. If you've got questions, or if you'd like to share a story, music, prose, if it's an audio file, send it to me as an MP3, or if you just want to be my guest, please write me, kevin@towardaBetterLife.com. That's kevin@towardaBetterLife.com. Until next week, enjoy your magical journey toward a better life.